After so many positive comments on my previous 3D printing for kids video, where you guys were asking for a part 2, and after you guys took my channel from 30 subscribers to over 300 in one video, I thought, why not deliver? So here is the follow-up. This lady I know in real life heard about how I run a 3D print club for kids. And she runs these programs all throughout the year, where she keeps a large group of kids occupied while their parents are busy forgetting they exist. Think kind of like summer camp, but for only 2 days out of the week. Now, she came to me and asked if I would do an event with her during the spring. This would be 2 days back to back where I teach them how my 3D printer works, I get them to design some toys, and then the next day I have those toys 3D printed. So I said yes. Months ago. And then I remembered about it the week before. But that's okay. I've done this a bunch and I know what I'm doing. The only thing is, there's a problem. Actually, there's 3 problems. So this might not seem like such a big deal, but I've never run a class only to do a turnaround for the next day. As in, I've never run a 3D print class and then 3D printed the results within the span of 24 hours. Like, it's possible, but I just haven't done anything on that sharp of a schedule. Another issue is that I'd be teaching multiple age groups this time. And for context, I've been teaching 5 through 10-year-olds, who are pretty easy to capture in their attention when you show them something cool. But this time, I'll also be teaching kids in their early teens. And I'm not sure if that's going to be received with more maturity, or if that's going to result in some kind of peer-led one-upmanship, where they try and get away with as much disrespectful behavior as they can without getting in trouble. Because we all know what teenagers are like. But my third issue is, since I'm there for 2 days, I can't just present and teach on the first day, hand out their models the next, and just peace out. I have to carry out a second session the next day. But as you could probably tell, I can't just run the same thing, because I'm not going to be there for another third day to give them a second round of 3D prints. So I have to find a solution to that too. I was kind of going into this blind, having a little experience, but in a totally different setup and setting. And lucky for me, there was no backing out. So the day comes where I show up to the venue, I don't know any of these kids, and I make an intro. Or at least I try, because there's about 80 kids in this gym hall, and they're all busy paying attention to themselves. So my friend organizing this thing makes way for me to introduce myself. The room is now pointed at me, and so I briefly tell them that I'm here to do a 3D printing workshop over the next day or 2. And shortly after, these 80 kids get sorted into 3 groups, one of which is the group that I'll be doing the 3D printing with. So it's about 30 kids, and they'll be split into 3 groups of 10 over the next 3 hours, in which I will run a 45-minute class for each of them where they'll be making something to get 3D printed. The 3 smaller groups were split up by age, and what ended up happening is that I was given the older kids first. So my first group was going to be a bunch of teenagers at 11 a.m. who've never met me before, and I have to keep their attention for 45 minutes. Hey, I'm CJ, and welcome to the 3D Printing and Design Workshop. And I explained today's design brief to them, which I'll get back to in a bit. Because this class went really well. The class I'm used to often consists of me starting the lesson, explaining the premise as quickly as possible so the kids can spend the rest of their time modeling and playing a little game at the end. But what I wasn't expecting was a 10-minute Q&A session at the start. Because although these kids are older and probably more informed about 3D printing than a 5-year-old would be, they had so much more questions than I was used to kids having. Usually it's something like, can you 3D print food? But this time around, they were asking about things like cost, the digital process of making models, as well as the different applications of 3D printing, like which industries might use it, or better yet, what I personally like to 3D print. So that was pretty smooth sailing to start off the lesson. But I did have to cut them off so we had time to make stuff. So I handed out some fast-drying clay and explained to them that once they make their model, I'll be collecting them at the end so that I can take pictures of the clay models with my phone and stitch them together to make a 3D model. And once I explained that, it all made sense to them. Now again, before I get to what I had them make, I ran those 2 classes back to back and had a pretty good experience with all 3. Notably, the latter, younger class was a bit tired after their sugar crash from lunch, but they got through it, which left me with the first problem I mentioned. how am I gonna turn around 30 models in one night? Okay, so I think it's time I tell you what I planned for them to make. Because I wanted something that would not only incorporate an existing part into a 3D print they designed, because it helps to connect the dots of designing something for a purpose, instead of just making some clay and getting a plastic replica in return. But also, I wanted something that would print reasonably fast so that it had to be small, as well as not being strict on design rules, so that it's personal to them, and so the younger kids don't struggle to adhere to my design brief. And lastly, this item needs to be incorporated into a tournament format for the following day, because we're all going to play a game together. And if I could, my friend wanted me to make it spring themed. Those are the problems I needed to solve. But luckily, I came up with a solution. So a while back, I made these spring pop toys, which was really popular with the weekly classes that I was running. But after ordering so much stock and not having used even half of them, I had an idea. What if instead of using the spring as a firing mechanism, perhaps it could be used as a stand? And what if we took the suction cup off and we glued the model directly onto the spring? This way it's a lot more skinny, so I can fit a smaller model on the end. But then I can also have the spring double as a shock absorber. Because what I'm planning is to turn these spring pops into what I call fling springs. And this is what we'll play our game with. So how it works is, you get a long table and you mark an area at the end, which is your target. You then tape off a line at the bottom of the table, which is your starting position, and you have to start behind this line. So what you gotta do is take turns flinging these fling springs as close to the target as possible by just flicking them like this. So if you've ever played lawn bowling or watched Olympic curling, it's basically the same thing. But if you flick it too hard and too far, your fling spring will go off the table. Now the cool thing is, you get to knock other people's springs out of the way with each turn. However, if you do wait to take your turn, your shot might not be as clear, seeing as there's a bunch of fling springs already in the way. But luckily this solves another two issues I was having. That being the spring theme, because what's more spring themed than a spring, and having these spring mounted toys for everyone gives them the same height and the exact same weight as each other. Now the designs that they made came in totally different from one another. Some kids made Easter eggs, some made baby chicks, some made flowers, others just made a cool model and called it a day. But now I was saddled with 3D printing these within the next 12 hours. Though luckily they just had to be big enough to sit on the end of a spring, which meant I could use as little material as I could get away with, cutting down the print time drastically. So for 30 models, 8 of which I had to reprint because they came off the printer while I was sleeping, I got the whole thing wrapped up in just under 12 hours of getting back home. Ready for the big reveal. I had each kid's name written down next to their model, and I called them up one by one. I told them about the tournament, where they would be competing for the chance to win this 3D printed fidget toy. So I explained to them the rules of the game, and that is when the tournament started. The first girl flicked her spring across the table, and it just held on at the end. And in the next turn, it was already beat. Now, with around 30 kids who were taking part, you can imagine how tense this got. Turn after turn, we saw new record distances, opponents getting slammed out of the arena, and some people playing just to grief the person in first place. But it was in the last 5 turns where the room became fixated on this endgame. There was a kid who had his spring about 3 inches from the target. At some point it had been further away, but somebody managed to knock it closer. And ever since, it hadn't budged. Well, the next 2 turns were complete duds, flying off the edge of the table entirely. But in the last 3 turns, there was a shift. A spring was flung just past the first place position, but far enough that it just took second place. But then, the second last turn took place, and it didn't even come close to the target, leaving us with one final turn. After lining up the shot, and the current first place holding his breath, the final kid takes his shot. It skips down the table and tumbles on its side. It rolls past first place and the second. But then, it rolls back, and then it rolled again. In, then out, then in, then back out again. And it wouldn't even do this predictably. It was a long roll, short roll again. It just kept popping in and out of first, second, and third place until it came to a whopping stop. In first place. You should have seen this room. They were on their knees in disbelief. And having never performed this game outside of a test environment, I was blown away by how incredible this turned out. And I bet you were too. Which is why I invite you to not only stick around for more videos like this, but if you are interested in running a club like this yourself, do let me know. Because I'm thinking of putting together a private community where each month I give out 4 unique projects and how to do them from start to finish, including 3D print files, as well as how-tos for setting up and executing each week, and how to go from nothing to setting up a club full of kids. In the meantime, you can check out my other videos on pricing these classes, but otherwise, like and subscribe, and send this video to somebody who you know would love this.